Yeah. Well, friends, I think Amanda's Wi-Fi might have cut out, but we're still here. Shana Tova. Nice to see everyone. In case you did not hear what our Program and Engagement Director Amanda Harrison had said, welcome to our first of 3 pre-high holiday programs here at Sinai Temple. We're really glad you're joining us. And I want to start by saying Shana Tova. We're gearing up. We're in the month of Elul. You might have seen some of our daily Elul posts. We're really in the season now. We're here. So we're so excited to be starting off and being here together. Oh, I think Amanda's back. Amanda, is there anything else you wanted to share with us as you pop back in?
I apologize. My internet went out for just a second. No, go ahead and start.
This is the life we live.
It's all over to you.
Great. So hi, I'm Rabbi Kornsgold, and I'm so glad you're joining us because part of what we're doing here tonight is preparing. We're thinking about the holiday is coming up, and there's a lot to do. There's the personal work we're doing. There's the internal work we're doing. We're going to be in some kind of preparatory mode for the next few weeks leading up to Rosh Hashanah. And part of that is thinking about what does our home look like? What is our home looking like in this holiday season? And in particular, what does our table look like for Rosh Hashanah? So what I wanted to spend time on together was thinking about what does the eve of Rosh Hashanah look like? What do the evenings look like in our homes, at our tables? And going through what is on our table? What are the different blessings we're saying? And what really are we doing with those tangible things in front of us? Because there's a lot of work that we do in this season that's soulful work. And then there's also a lot of what we do, which is physical work in front of us. So just like any holiday, Rosh Hashanah starts by lighting candles. That's how in our tradition we say this day is starting. And transitioning us, we use light as a transitional object, going from going from the mundane day into Kodesh, into a sanctified day. And that's step 1 of lighting our candles. And step 2 of how do we in our Jewish tradition create the sanctity of a day? How do we actually say this day is different? This day is holy. We're starting a holy day. The way we do that is by saying Kiddush, is by blessing over wine. We use wine as a sanctifying object. And what's particularly unique about Kiddush on Rosh Hashanah is that at the end of Kiddush for Rosh Hashanah on both nights of the holiday, and we'll talk in a moment about the idea of being a 2-day holiday, we say Shehachianu. We say the bracha, Shehachianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lezman hazeh. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who brought us to this day, this particular day, so that this moment could happen. And what's unique about the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, or I should say, really, one of the unique things about the holiday of Rosh Hashanah is that it's a 2-day holiday. And here in the diaspora, you might be thinking, well, we have a lot of holidays that are 2 holidays in a row, 2 days in a row that are holy days. And that is true that a lot of our holidays, like the first 2 days of Sukkot in the diaspora, the first 2 days of Pesach, the end of Sukkot, the end of Pesach, these are 2 days. But what's special in particular about Rosh Hashanah is that no matter where you are in the world, it's a 2-day holiday. And we start by thinking about why is that? And Rosh Hashanah is actually a holiday from the Torah, that God actually says, you're going to sanctify this Rosh Hashanah, and our tradition calls it Yom HaArichta, meaning one elongated day, that we think about it because of how we think about time as 2 days. There's the first day of Rosh Hashanah and there's the second day of Rosh Hashanah. But perhaps God is experiencing it as just one ongoing day, Yom HaArichta, this long day. So what that means is that no matter where you are, it's a 2-day holiday. We extend the holiday into 2 days. But then you might be thinking, wait a second, how do we say Shehecheyanu, the blessing for bringing us to this particular day, 2 days in a row? If it's just one day, why wouldn't we just bless on the first day? And that's a great question. And we'll get there when we get to some of the different foods and the symbolism of what goes on our table. But I want you to keep that question in mind of, if this day is this elongated special day, how are we going to differentiate between the two? Is there anything that makes it 2 days, that makes each day feel different? But we'll get there a little bit later. So I want to start with what's on our table. The first thing that's particular and special about Rosh Hashanah is the type of challah that we have. That just like any day that we are having a holiday meal or a Shabbat meal, we are going to have challah. That's one of the things that we put on our table. But when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, we start with 2 round chalot. So here I have 2 round chalot. And in some ways, a challah, you could say, well, I could, my child might come home and make me a challah in the shape of a bird or the shape of a key or the shape of a butterfly, and it's still challah. But specifically for Rosh Hashanah, we have challah that is round. And that's what starts our meal. And the round challah is really what begins the special symbolism of what's on the table. So we have 2 round chalot. And the reason for the round chalot is that we're thinking about cycles. That Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, the new year, and the type of new year that it is actually, we say in our tradition that it is the birthday of the world, that it's marking the cycle of the world. So the roundness of our chalot is alluding to that cycle, to the idea of us being in a cyclical moment. And not only would I say the roundness is alluding to the cyclical moment, but it even goes further, and one could say that it looks like the earth, that there's something about the idea of a circle is reminding us that it's the birthday of the earth. And we'll later talk about what foods do we have on Rosh Hashanah, and the circle is going to come back. This idea of the circle and having foods on our table that are in the shape of a circle is going to be a key part of many traditions around Rosh Hashanah. So we start with the challah. Then we have something that goes on top of our challah for Rosh Hashanah. And for Rosh Hashanah, we're going to have honey on our challah. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's just, a really nice addition, a special thing for Rosh Hashanah. But honey actually has a lot of background in our tradition. I mean, we start by thinking about how God told us that the land was going to be a land of milk and honey. But honey, for thousands of years, has actually been the key sweetener used in ancient traditions and medieval traditions, that we think about going to the supermarket and you can pick up any kind of sugar you want. You could pick up powdered sugar, you could pick up white sugar, you could pick up brown sugar. But honey traditionally has been the ultimate sweetener, has really been the thing that when traditions over the years have thought, how do we make something sweet? honey was the way to go. So part of what brought the idea of what kind of year do we want? Honey was the first thought for our people. One, because we're drawn to this land that's thought about as the land of milk and honey. And you can use whatever honey you want. Traditionally people use like a multi-flower or a bee honey, but date honey is also appropriate, any type of honey that speaks to you. So instead of using salt on our challah, which is what we traditionally do, reminding us of the sacrifices, we switched to honey. And not only are we going to be having honey for Rosh Hashanah, but we actually extend the use of honey on our challah instead of salt for all of the holiday season. So we're going to have honey up until the end of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and Simchat Torah. And the other piece of what's very special about honey is that it comes up in other places in our tradition as a sweetener. There's a tradition that in your first year of marriage, you actually extend the use of honey for that entire year. So instead of using salt on your challah in your first year of marriage, you would use it for that whole year of that first year, because honey really is this ultimate sweetener in our tradition. So that's where we start. We have our round chalot. We have our honey added. And that's how we begin the season. I'm going to move over the chalot because when we usually think about this holiday and we think about what does honey go with, I would say most people, including myself, don't initially think honey goes with challah, even though it's a great combo. But honey, we usually think of as being paired with apples. That the two together, having apples dipped in honey, is the next part of the Rosh Hashanah meal. So we start with kiddush, sanctifying the day. We move into motzi, the blessing over our challah. And then we actually have a special blessing for apples and honey. And there's a lot of different historical traditions around apples and honey. Part of it, like the challah, is to say honey is signifying a sweet new year. But then where did this idea of an apple come from? And that, I will say, is a little bit fuzzier historically. That on the one hand, people would say, well, apples were very available, so it was a good thing to dip in. But another reason actually is that in medieval times, apples were not quite as sweet as we might think about them. That we get to go to the grocery store and we pick up fruit, and it's been curated for us in a lot of ways. But apples actually used to be thought of as bitter. And there's something very special about dipping your bitterness into sweetness. That if we're thinking about how are we going to create opportunity for this upcoming year, about not only are we spending time in services and time in services where we're thinking about our intentions for the new year, but we're actually on our table thinking about what do we want our year to look like. That we're dipping something bitter because we all have bitterness inside of us, or we all experience bitter moments. Not every moment in the human life is going to be positive. And we actually have the opportunity to change that sometimes, that we're dipping the bitter moments into the sweetness. And we say, Yihi ratzon shetihi kadesh aleinu shana tova umetuka, that when we are eating the apples dipped in the honey, we say, may it be your will that you bring upon us, God, a year that is good and that is sweet. And by asking for that, there's in and of itself an acknowledgement that things are not always sweet, and that's okay. But it's also acknowledging that we want to set the intention for a sweet and a good new year. So that's where we end up with our apples and honey. I want to move us back to this question of what makes the difference between the first day of Rosh Hashanah and the second day of Rosh Hashanah, of how are we distinguishing the 2 days, and how are we remembering that we might not want to distinguish the 2 days? Because as I had mentioned, it's thought of as one extended holy day. So on the one hand, we want to say, well, there might be special things between day 1 and 2. And on the other hand, we might want to say, well, maybe there shouldn't be anything distinct. But part of what we've actually brought into our tradition is that unknown of not actually being so certain about what we should do with this question. So what happens? When we get to night number 2, and I have to tell you, I don't quite have a prompt for this, and you'll see why in a moment. We're supposed to have a new fruit. So after you have your apples and honey, you're supposed to eat a new fruit. So that's why I don't really have it here, because, that's a little bit more choose your own adventure. Something that's a new fruit for me might not be the same new fruit for you. That totally depends on the crowd and how interesting your regular meals are. But the reason why we have a new fruit is so that we could be sure of a reason to say on night number 2, Shehachianu, that we want to be able to make sure that we can say the Shehachianu blessing of saying, thank you, God, for bringing us to this particular special moment. And part of how this blessing works is that traditionally, you say this blessing when you're in a situation that hasn't happened for at least a year. So we say the Shehachianu blessing at the end of Kiddush because we're talking about Rosh Hashanah as a whole. Thank you, God, for bringing us to this moment. But just to be sure, we're meant to have in mind on the second night of Rosh Hashanah during Kiddush that we're also saying Shehachianu for the new fruit. And what might that new fruit be? So obviously it's different for everyone, but I would recommend, even going to Whole Foods. They've always got something interesting. Go to a specialty market. Find something that you feel like, I've never seen this before. I don't even know how to eat this. This is really a moment where I get to say Shehachianu, just to make sure that in case it's supposed to be 2 days, we keep in mind there's still a reason for us to say, thank you, God, for bringing us to this special moment. So that's the end of the things that we bless on our table. I also want to move into spending a little bit of time talking about what are other items that we put on our table that we don't have a particular blessing for, but rather they're traditionally set on a Rosh Hashanah table. The first is the pomegranate. And the pomegranate here, and this is not a real pomegranate, that might be a little bit too messy for this nice white tablecloth, but the pomegranate is particularly used and has been used in our tradition since the time of the Torah, that the pomegranate is one of the 7 species, the 7 particular bountiful foods from the land of Israel. So it's been part of our tradition. The Kohen Gadol would wear bells of pomegranates at the bottom of his robe. And the pomegranate has just over thousands of years been a central image for the Jewish people. But why do we use it on our Rosh Hashanah table? And that reason is because of the seeds. Yes, they are delicious, and I recommend using them in as many recipes as you'd like. And there's been the idea in the Jewish tradition that there's so many seeds in a pomegranate, there must be as many seeds as there are mitzvot, as there are commandments. That we say there are 613 seeds in a pomegranate. Now, one fun thing to do is count, but really what we're saying is that we want to emulate that we want to put this on our table to remind us that there are so many commandments that we'd like to fulfill. That in this upcoming year, as we're beginning this new year, part of what we're striving for is being able to say, I'm going to work on fulfilling mitzvot. I'm going to work on improving myself because we all have things to work on. And for that reason, we have the pomegranate on our table for Rosh Hashanah. Another specialty item that many have on their table that I did not bring for you this evening is the head of a fish. That there's a tradition to have the head of a fish on the table for Rosh Hashanah. And I would say there are two main reasons for this. One is that it's the head of the year. May it be a start. That there's other traditions of having the heads of other things, but the head of a fish is a little bit easier to put on your table. It's the start of the year. The other is that we want to be heavy in our minds and our learning, that we want to be sinking our heads into our learning. And part of that is thinking about our minds and our heads. So we put the head of a fish on our table sometimes to recognize that's where we should be. And there's always learning to do. This is not just learning in school. This is lifelong learning, that there's so many different types of learning for each person. We should be like the head. We should strive to be at maybe the head of the class, but really we should be the head of whatever is best for you, wherever that learning is. Some other traditions that I want to mention, and this actually goes back to the roundness of the challah. We have the challah on our table, and that is something that everyone will have on their table. But I also want to mention the roundness of the challah because there's a tradition to have round foods in general. And now you've got a few weeks to think about, okay, what's my menu going to be? Am I going to have lentils? Am I going to have meatballs? What types of round foods for that idea of having something cyclical, something that's motioning to the cycles of life to have on my table? There's also a tradition to bring back the idea of sweetness, doesn't necessarily need to be honey, but people have sweet foods for Rosh Hashanah. That might be squash, that might be honey cake, it might be kugels, it might be something else, whatever it is that makes you feel like, oh, this meal is actually extra sweet. Maybe the flavoring of my chicken, instead of doing a savory herb, I'm going to do a sweet citrus. So that's another piece to think about. Okay, what do I want on my menu that's going to emulate this holiday season? And the third tradition that some people have is having foods that signify a multitude. That if you think about foods like couscous or rice or a bowl of lentils, something that you look at the bowl and you feel like, I can't even count how many pieces are in this dish. That is also a tradition of Rosh Hashanah to think about traditionally the idea of multiplying, but really what it is how are you being generative? How are we growing ourselves? That might be how are you physically growing your family, but it also might be just how are we being generative as opposed to constricted? That when you start with your couscous and it looks like a small little half a cup, and it ends up being so much bigger than you expected in the pot, or it ends up being like millions of tiny little things. How are we representing our table in what we actually want for the year? So with that, we're closing kind of the traditional things in our Rosh Hashanah table, but tradition is actually something that's highly diverse and important in this holiday season. So we want to take some time. I invited our friend here, Angela Madahi. And Angela is a longtime member of Sinai Temple, a past president, and currently a student at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. And there's a lot of different traditions about what happens at the Rosh Hashanah table. So I wanted to invite Angela here to share with us what's on your Rosh Hashanah table, Angela, and how might that look different than just what I've shared thus far?
Thank you, Rabbi. It's really wonderful, and I appreciate you taking time to do this class to educate our members and our viewers, and to invite me to help you to do that. It's something very new to me, but I'm excited about sharing what I know. And I know that you've shared this pamphlet that I sent you with all the people that are on this session. And then the first thing I wanted to say is that it's beautiful. Traditions are a beautiful thing. They are what binds us. They give meaning to the continued actions that we do that are a result of our religion and our tradition. And they give beauty and color to our lives. And as you said, what we do on Rosh Hashanah is a lot of the things that we put on our table are symbolisms. The symbolisms of hopes and dreams that we have for the new year. And so is it with Mizrahi Jews, and the Persian Jews that I come from a Persian heritage are part of that Mizrahi tradition. So what I'm sharing with you today is not only for Persian Jews, all Mizrahi Jews, and I believe even Sephardic Jews perform this tradition in their own way. And what we do is we add simanim, signs, what we call them signs, to our Seder, what we call a Seder table. And the signs that we use in particular, they vary, but they represent each of the signs that we use. They represent the exact foods are different, but what they stand for is the same thing. For example, Jews from Libya mix sugar and sesame seed instead of string beans or fenugreek. And Persian Jews actually use beans, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And then we actually do recite blessings over these items. But the blessings are not Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, because that is a Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. So that blessing that we say, for example, in connection to the Shabbat candles, that's a blessing that's commanded from, that refers back to the commandments as they're commanded in the Torah. These blessings were not commanded in the Torah, and we say Yehi Ratzon Milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu, which translates, may it be your will, God, and God of our ancestors. And then we put in our wish that is symbolized by that food, our hope for that particular thing to happen in the new year. So one of the simanim is dates. Amanda, can you fast forward to the dates? There. So the Hebrew word, so all of these simanim are there because they have some sort of their word in their name in Hebrew has some sort of a relation to what we're asking for, to the hope. For example, the Hebrew word for date, tamar, resembles the word in Hebrew, yitamu, for end. The date represents our desire for our enemies to end their hateful conquest. And so we say, Yehi Ratzon Milfanecha, Hashem Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu, sheyitamu oivei v'sonenu v'chol mevakshei ra'atenu. The next is the string beans. Can you move to the string beans? Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not going into that. So the Aramaic word for fenugreek, and fenugreek is one of the options, string beans, fenugreek, or beans, is rubia. And it's similar to the Hebrew word yirbu, which is to increase. And interestingly, so we're asking God to increase our merits, and that God will take favor in us. And interestingly, in Farsi, lubia sounds very much like rubia. Lubia is the word for beans. So we make red, like a chili, red beans. It's like a little soup of thick soup of chili, of red beans. The next is leek. Now we don't use real long leek. We use the little tiny leeks. They are like they look like the ends of a green onion. And they're in Aramaic, they are called karti. And it is similar to the Hebrew word karet, which means cut off. Even someone, for example, who did a lot of sins in biblical times would be placed in karet. He would be cut off from the community. And we eat that because we hope that those who wish evil upon us will be cut off. Then we eat beets. Other people might eat Swiss chard. But we eat red beets. And selek in Hebrew is the term for beets, both in Hebrew and in Aramaic. And it sounds like silek in Hebrew, which means depart. And that is in the wish that our enemies and haters and those who wish evil upon us shall depart. Next is squash or gourd, and I think we have it in our list of zucchini. Yeah, there. The Aramaic word is kra, and it's reminiscent of the Hebrew word kira, to tear. Like when you tear your clothes, when God forbid somebody passes away, and kara, to proclaim and to announce. And we do that so that the evil of our verdict be ripped up and that our merits be announced before us. So that the zucchini has a dual function. The evils should be ripped up and our merits should be called forward. And then we have the pomegranate, which Rabbi Gabby already mentioned, but we do say a blessing over it. It is Yehi Ratzon milfanecha Adonai Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu ve'imotenu she'nihiyeh melei im mitzvot karimot. It refers to the fact that our mitzvot and our good deeds should be as full as the seeds of a pomegranate. And that we should have as many blessings as there are seeds. And you already mentioned that it is said that the pomegranate has 613 seeds, equal to that of mitzvot. We also do the apples dipped in honey. And then we don't only symbolically put a fish or a sheep head. Actually, what we do is we eat tongue. Yes, the meat, and that is that we should be the head and not the tail, I guess. This is usually what we say. But it refers to the head of the year, the Rosh Hashanah, which is Rosh Hashanah. And so we literally put something from the head of the table. And if you're using a fish, that actually this alludes to Deuteronomy 28:13, which says that God will make Moses the head and not the tail. Some people put a sheep's head on the table to symbolize the ram that spared Isaac in the Akedah. The biblical story, of course, and very much in the beginning of the Torah, which we read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Now, if you're a vegetarian, it works also that you use the head of a lettuce or a head of a cauliflower. The point is that you're referring to a head. And I think that's it. But what I wanted to state is the idea is that even with the blessings where that refers to our enemies and to the evildoers, we're not asking God to kill them or to eliminate them. We're really asking God to keep them away from us, to keep our purity, our happiness, our centeredness, our joy within ourselves. So we don't get distracted from this path that we're starting, this path of this new year that we're starting anew with a clean energy and good hopes. That's it. Rabbi, you there?
That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Are there any questions?
We had one question here. Let me just pull it up. This was from Claudia. She said, "Thank you so much for the informative session. Maybe we say Shechianu the second night because our souls have been renewed the first day." And that's in a question mark. We're essentially reciting it the second time as a new person. So maybe you can provide some perspective on that.
Me?
Yes, if you're willing to.
I think that's look. I always come from the camp that any mitzvah or tradition we do should be meaningful. It should uplift our lives, bring us closest to our soul, and have some sort of grounding and foundation. Yes, we're supposed to do na'aseh v'nishma. I agree. However, if we are eating kosher or keeping Shabbat or doing any kind of mitzvah that is prescribed for us, when it becomes meaningful, I think it's multiplied in many ways. So whatever works for you, I think this is really a wonderful additional explanation as to why we say Shechianu. And yes, the entire purpose of the introspection of the month of Elul is to shed us from the garbage and to go inward and to understand ourselves and to do tshuva. What does tshuva mean? To me, it means tshuva means getting back to the soul that God originally gave us. And that soul is clean, and that soul is bright, and that soul shines. And when we clean everything around us, clean off all the dirt, and really do tshuva within ourselves to see what are we doing wrong? Are we on the right path? How are we treating the people that are around us? We become a new person if we did that job correctly throughout the month of Elul. And so, yes, Claudia, I definitely believe that it is, if we've done the practice, it is very appropriate to say Shechianu because of that.
My apologies. My internet keeps cutting in and out, I think because of the storm aftermath. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for taking that time to answer the question. I heard a little bit of it before it cut out. Unfortunately, Rabbi Gavi is feeling under the weather, so we're going to have to wrap this up. But I really appreciate you being on here tonight, Angela, to go over different traditions. And thank you all for attending tonight's session. Again, we'll have our second session next Thursday. It'll be a musical performance in Cohen Chapel. We hope you all will join us then. And again, thank you and happy holidays to everyone. Happy New Year.
Shana Tova.